There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean Breathes Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads. I'm actually filming this Thursday night. I'm going to see if I can get into the habit of recording this weekly video the day before, because I don't know if it's because I'm getting used to new editing software, but it's taking me forever to get the Friday Reads edited and posted on Fridays, taking 12 hours. So there's a couple naps in and amongst all that, but in an effort to not have my Friday completely swallowed up morning to night, I'm filming this on Thursday night. I've had a great reading week, and I have a biblio adventure to tell you about. TM the Book Cougars. Last Friday, I went to a book launch, and it was very special for a couple of reasons. One, it was the book launch for Margaret Macpherson's new collection of linked short stories. You will remember that Margaret has been on my channel twice. I interviewed her about her most recent memoir, Tracking the Caribou Queen. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And she was my mystery guest about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer ago. And that was a fabulous chat as well. And then, quite suddenly, this short story collection came together after that. It's called Tilting Towards Joy. And it was just published like a day or two ago by Signature Editions. So I took it upon myself to organize a dinner for Margaret, because I like her very much. I know her a little bit. My mom is a big fan of her writing, and she had as a guest reader at this book launch last Friday night, Sharon Butala. So I had it for her, for Margaret and Sharon and me and Mom, and in fact, Sharon brought her son, who I'd never met. So it was a fabulous get-together in advance of the book launch, and then the book launch was fabulous. Sharon read from the opening of Leaving Wisdom, which is probably my favorite part of that whole novel, which I enjoyed very much. And then Margaret read from Tilting Towards Joy. Great title, lovely cover. The premise of them is a Canadian couple temporarily living in France on a house exchange, and plot ensues. So that was a great start to the week, if I'm counting from Friday night to Friday night. And I have just another exquisite mystery guest for you. Speaking of short stories, let's go meet them. This week's mystery guest is the Calgary writer, Kirti Bhadresa. Joining us from Calgary, her new short story collection, her debut book, An Astonishment of Stars, came out in October this year. Kirti, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's so great to meet you. So maybe the way to get this conversation started is there was a matchmaker involved in matching us up, and that was a friend of mine and a friend of this channel, Barb Howard. Tell us about your connection to Barb Howard and this short story collection.
Sure. Barb is a friend of mine now, too. I actually first met Barb when my oldest son, who's now 14, was 5 months old. I tried to take a short story writing class at the University of Calgary, and Barb was the instructor. And I had this 5-month-old baby, but I was like, really wanted to write and do something for myself. I got one story I quite liked out of that was later published, but I was so overwhelmed at the time, having a baby at home and being a new mom. So I kind of dropped my writing career at that point. And then 10 years later or more, I ended up applying for a mentorship program through the Writers Center in Calgary. And I was paired with Barb, and I had just sort of this sketch of an outline that would later become my book. And Barb, from the first time we met, said, "I'm willing to work as hard as you want to over the next 4 months." So we did, and we basically put together like solid rough drafts of most of the stories in this collection in pretty short order. We had a meeting a week via Zoom that always ran over. After that, I ended up working on a project that's close to her heart too, called the Shoe Project. And
Yes.
So we continued our relationship, but I'm not sure this book would have happened without Barb.
That is fantastic. And she put me in touch with you, and here we are.
Yeah.
So I heard, a little bird told me, it wasn't Barb, was on the internet that the stories in this collection, or at least the original ones, this started out as a list poem. Tell us more
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, well, I had this idea for a list poem of different kinds of kitchens. So originally the title of this book was Kitchen Stories, but just to go back further from that, I've always found like when I wanted to be writing and couldn't be, that my kitchen was a place of creativity to me. And I started just making a list of different kinds of kitchens. Like I was outside with my young son one day and he was picking chives and like he figured out how to use them like a straw. I was thinking of like different ways we gather food. And so I had this list of all the different kinds of kitchens, and the kitchen of my mother, the kitchen of my mother-in-law, the kitchen of my, all these different just short descriptions. And I always had this idea of, could I expand them into stories? So that is, and what I ended up doing. So I took each of those items, expanded it into a paragraph. The paragraph is basically what I started talking about with Barb. And over time, they sort of grew with characters. But in each story in this collection, there's still a kitchen. So the kitchen is barely there, but still there.
I have a feeling that reading this book, which I very much look forward to doing, and I hope you might come back for a deeper dive kind of chat once I have, is going to make me really hungry, Kirti.
Yeah, it might. It might, or it might do the opposite. I don't know.
Oh, I don't think so. I think curry plays a fairly prominent role in several of those kitchens. And I noticed that you're wearing a curry colored blouse today. Is
Yeah.
that intentional?
No, no, it just worked out that way. Yeah, but curry, as in, I'm also trying to play with that idea of like not being nostalgic. So there are characters in the story who make a curry that is nostalgic at times, but then there's other characters who are like to feel in their bodies are eating a greasy burger. So I'm also trying to play with some of the stereotypes around, that idea of curry and literature and nostalgia.
And also, my understanding is that the protagonists of all or most of these stories are, I think you've described them something like the kind of people that see every day and maybe many of us barely give a thought to. I don't know, it's probably a rough paraphrase of what you said, but
Yeah.
tell us more about the characters.
Well, something that's always on my mind that I think about a lot is the fact that we don't ever see each other, see ourselves from the outside. So even if we look in a mirror, we're seeing a reflection. So who we are to ourselves is very different from who we walk around as in the world. So I'm a person who was born in Red Deer, Alberta. My husband likes to joke that I'm a little bit redneck in some ways. I don't know, but I don't, just as a joke. But yeah, so I don't walk around thinking all the time about my identity and that I'm got brown skin or that I'm of Indian background. I just walk around as a person going to the mall, picking up my kids from school. And often when it comes up, it's jarring to me. So I think what I'm trying to do with some of these characters is show their internal lives. There's one story where I actually say where the character is from, but the rest of the time, it's not really that important. That it's just that they're people who are trying to, pay their taxes and live their lives. And there's a few surreal elements in this story which were really fun to play. Well, a couple of the stories which was really fun to play with, but mostly it's people living ordinary lives and trying to get through everyday moments.
Well, that all sounds fantastic. Is there one, maybe your favorite, or one that representative that you could tell us a little bit more about the protagonist and kind of the opening premise of the story?
Yeah. Well, I think the one that seems to be kind of resonating with people is the one that has some sort of magical elements of, it's the story of an aunt and a niece, and the aunt starts to levitate. The story is called Lighten Up. But
Oh, that
yeah,
sounds like a totally Barb Howard influence.
and that's one that I've been really enjoying hearing the feedback on from people. What I like about it is that I really like exploring relationships that aren't romantic. I feel like a romance novel is great, but I feel like there's so much emphasis on, find your partner, your life is over, you've done what you need to do. But these are people who are, their most important relationship is not necessarily a romantic relationship. So in this case, it's a niece who wants to be her authentic self And the person she finds who is her authentic self is her aunt. And the aunt starts to sort of drift away from her, both metaphorically and literally.
It's sounding more and more like a Sean book with everything you're telling me about it. So I can't wait
Oh,
to read it.
good.
So why short stories?
I love reading short stories. I'm actually surprised to find out not everybody does love short stories, it turns
Yeah, me
out.
too. Me
Yeah,
too.
because I just feel like, there's nothing like at the end of a busy day, like I've got a little bit of quiet time and I can read a story beginning to end, have that satisfied feeling of like, I've completed it. I know what's going to happen. It's not going to keep me up all night, but it's like I've done something for myself. And even in writing them, I just found it easier with my kids around and with busy family life during COVID, everybody's home, that I just found I could edit the story. I could be like, okay, I've got an hour. I'm going to read through this story one more time. And I just found in terms of writing too, it made it, like, I want to say more manageable, but also more accessible in a way that you don't have to be a person who has, a great escape where you can disappear for days at a time and, not have any other obligations. But for people who do have busy lives and other obligations, I feel like short stories are for us.
Everything you've said makes sense. And I think that in some ways, or at least for some writers, I've heard many writers say that they're more difficult to write than a novel because of that
Yes.
compression and
My incredible editor, Jen Suk-Fung Lee, she would point out that, in a short story collection or in a short story, there's no room for, everything has to be in just the right place. Everything has to be meaningful. All the words have to be right because there's no forgiveness in there. There's no elasticity. It's like,
absolutely. Your debut book is a collection of short stories. I'd like to ask you what you're working on now, and I'll be very curious to hear if it's something other than another short story collection.
yes, well, since I've started this novel, I've got an agent. So I've been working with Carolyn Ford, and I've got my next book is out on submission right now, but she helped me shape it a little bit. Short stories aren't a great sell for everybody, but she pointed out that writing a novel from multiple points of view as an author gives you a lot of that same, like you can
Yeah.
still divide it up into manageable sections, but it presents as a novel. And so that was really an exciting idea to me. So I have completed a novel. And I also had this idea that I should complete my second book before my first book came out because I might end up overwhelmed by feedback. And that has turned out to be I'm really glad I did that. So I was able
Okay.
to write a novel with just in my own little bubble still. And I'm excited about it. I'm going to see where it goes. Hopefully, somebody else gets excited about it and wants it. But we'll see.
Absolutely.
As far as it goes, it's still my baby. So
Still in process. Well,
yeah,
that sounds great. Do you have any aspirations to try any other genres? Oh my goodness, the possibilities are almost endless. Essays, poetry, plays,
yeah. You know,
memoir.
yeah. I think a lot about. I'd love to be able to write poetry, but I just don't. I find it. I have one or two poems that I feel like I've been working on my entire life. I don't know actually how people write poetry because it really, like, if we think a short story has to be well constructed, a poem just has to be every word in the right place. And I'm not sure I have that skill, that level of skill. I do think about memoir, but I just like every time I read memoir, I think how brave it is. And I'm not sure I'm that brave either. It's a very vulnerable genre, I think.
And if you read another poem, it might turn into another short story
Yeah,
collection by
it
the time
might.
you're done.
Yeah. Yes. That might
That's
actually
great.
be what ends up happening because I always want to say more. So,
You have some books too, or I should say, you have some reading material to recommend.
yeah. Well, I think a lot of us are feeling overwhelmed these days, and there's a lot going on that's sort of frightening. I find so I've actually been having trouble reading lately, which is really unlike me. So I was really lucky recently. My family gifted me the short story advent calendar.
Uh-huh.
I'm on day 3. I get to read day 4 today. And this I found has just been like really, I don't want to say life-saving and be too dramatic, but really like has helped me get back into reading kind of more widely.
So for people that don't know, and I think lots of my viewers will be familiar with it, it's a kind of a subscription thing. You buy the how many short stories is it? I'm so biblically
Yeah, there's
challenged.
25. So
25.
you buy this box. It's a little bit pricey, but it's
It
like so
is.
beautifully made. So this is story number one, and you flip it open and you get your little story in here. And what's fun
Yeah.
is I've been reading it and then I pass it on to my husband. And if they're appropriate for our kids are reading them.
Oh,
So it's
lovely.
almost like a little mini book club every night in our house.
Absolutely. I have been gifted with hand-me-down advent calendars by a bookish
Yeah.
friend, and I haven't dipped into them. But for people that are, I guess it's a little bit late for people to buy it now, if unless they don't care about following the advent calendar part of it. But I did check the website, and I'll put the link to the website in the show notes. They are shipping them by courier. So we have a Canadian postal strike, but they are shipping them by courier. So
Well, and a friend of mine gave me a really wonderful tip that she actually bought the previous year's ones on sale. And I mean, I guess if you haven't read 2023 or 2022 and they do still sell them at a discounted price, you can just read the last year's
it
ones.
don't need to be this year's. I'm so curious. Tell us about the one you read yesterday.
Yes. Well, the one I read yesterday was about, so the main character has a friend who's an author, and the author is really into technology and has found a way to, if somebody is reading a book on their e-reader, to insert their own book into that book. So it's almost like a choose your own adventure, but they've inserted their own writing into it. So it's the first one that was maybe a bit speculative, but interesting because if I hadn't found it in this format, I'm not sure I would have read the story. Okay, so this is Eat, Pray, Click by Ed
Right.
Park.
Oh, Ed Park. Yes, he's a
Yes.
Korean, I think, American writer, and he had a novel come out this year, I believe, that was
Oh, okay.
apparently well received.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was definitely a short story that I would not have picked up and I wouldn't have
Yeah.
read if not for that. And now I'd be curious to read the novel as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first story was my favorite. It was uplifting and heartwarming without being cheesy. And it's a story that was about music. So that was really nice. But what I like about them is they're not religious stories. They're
Yeah.
not preachy in any way, but they're also not, it's so far, they're not dark either. So they're
Yeah.
sort of stories that people would like, might challenge you a little bit. And I believe that the publisher is out of Alberta as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I've been going back to in these strange times is my literary magazines in a similar way. So I subscribe to Room, which is a feminist magazine out of Vancouver, I believe.
I've just looked it up, and the original title was longer, Room of One's Own, of
A
course,
Room of
after the
One's Own, of
Whoa.
course. Yes.
Yeah.
What I love about this is it's like in the similar way in these like kind of difficult times to get into big, heavy books. These literary magazines in Canada, and I've only really read Canadian ones, there's so much hope in them because they're, if not young in age, young in energy, that they're like distinctive voices, they're experimental, they're vibrant, they're strong, they're like, they're not, they're short again, like the short story advent calendar. I find I can like pick it up, flip it open, read something and feel like, okay, I'm connected to like beauty or art or something
The
again.
literary zeitgeist.
Yes.
Well, I don't think I was aware that it was still being published, so that's good. Good to
Oh,
know.
yeah. No, there's some wonderful, and that's how I got my start quite recently was getting stories published in literary magazines. I think three of them are in my book were originally published in literary magazines, different earlier versions of them. But what they do for, the literary world, that they give us confidence and they give us insight and input and editing, it's really phenomenal. The last book I wanted to, that I've really been speaking to me lately is Teresa Wong's All Our Ordinary Stories. And this is Teresa writes graphic novels.
Oh, okay.
So this is the story of her family's journey to Canada, her relationship with her parents. What I love about this is it's a heavy story, but she uses light in the images so beautifully. So there's so much light within it that even though it's a heavy story, it's like I can relate. In some ways I can't relate, so it's new, but I also always find like a way to pause in it, which is what I find I'm really needing these days.
And she's also a Calgary, I guess, a
Graphic memoirist, actually. So she
yeah.
write her first book was Dear Scarlet, which was a journey with postpartum, her everything she went through postpartum, drawn by her, written by her, which is incredible. And then now All Our Ordinary Stories, which is the incredible story that the journey her parents made and their relationship.
That sounds amazing.
Yes.
Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. I hope you'll come back someday, Kirti.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you so much.
Kirti was wonderful, and I'm delighted that Barb Howard has been her mentor, and that's how I got her to be a mystery guest. All right, I have been busy editing one video. My full-length chat with Wendy Burton, the author of one of the best novels I've read in a long time, Ivy's Tree, went up last night. I've been singing her praises since I started the novel and finished the novel, and now I've taped a lovely long chat about the novel with Wendy Burton. And if you're the kind of viewer of my channel who is only really interested in the books that you've already heard of, I don't know what you're doing watching me if that's the case, because I so rarely read the books that you might have heard of. I really urge you to have a peek at this chat with Wendy Burton and consider reading it, because I really need to make this book a lot more well known. It came out at the height of COVID and just kind of dropped like a stone, despite being of such high quality and such a wonderful novel. I haven't finished any books this week. I have restarted a book because it was for a buddy read that got put on hold with my friend Gwen. We started reading Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, the Booker Prize winner from last year. Last winter, maybe? I don't know when it was. And life happened for both of us, and it got put on hold. So it's now, what's the opposite of on hold? Off hold? So we're going to be discussing it just before Christmas. So I am back reading Prophet Song, and I was really enjoying it. Enjoy is not quite the word. It's a very atmospheric dystopian read that is probably freaking me out even more now that I'm reading it in the wake of the US election. It's set in Ireland, but it's about how authoritarianism just suddenly takes hold of Ireland. And oh my God, this poor family. Its father gets snatched into indefinite detention for no reason, and then there's nothing that they can do. Oh, beautifully written, just gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. So back reading that. I'm about 5 pages away from finishing The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon, Volume 3 by Beth Brower. I'm reading it to Mary Jean, and literally 5 pages to read, or maybe 10. 10 pages to read tonight, and that will be finished. So I will wrap this up next week, starting as early as tomorrow, or certainly on the weekend. The next book I'm going to start to read, Mary Jean, is Christ on a Bike by Orla Owen, and you might remember that Orla was my mystery guest a few months ago. I can't wait to read it. So I described it to Mary Jean, and she said that sounded very interesting indeed. The premise of this is really unusual. This woman gets an unexpected inheritance, but there's rules attached. One of the rules is she can't spend the money, like it's a really large inheritance, really big lump sum of money, and she can't spend it on anybody else. She can't share her wealth with anybody. She can buy gifts, but that's tightly scrutinized, like a maximum price per gift of this such and such, and if she goes above that, she's going to risk losing the inheritance. And there's one other, and the other rule, there's 3 rules. The only other rule that I remember clearly is she has to move from wherever she's living in the UK to Wales. And plot ensues. Doesn't that sound intriguing? And finally, my last buddy read of the year with Joe Smith. We're going to sneak one more in before the end of the year, and that is an Australian novel, Hospital, by Sanya Rushdi. And it was actually originally written in Bengali and translated from Bengali by Arunava Sinha, who was my mystery guest. I'll put a link to that chat in the show notes. And I splurged for this Australian edition because they were having a bit of a sale shortly after I had that chat with Arunava. And it was still much more expensive than the, I forget, was the British edition or the American edition or whatever it was, but I wanted this cover, an illustration by the author. So I have it, and Joe has a copy or an ebook or something, and we're going to buddy read it. It's about mental health. I don't know if it's autobiographical, but it's based on real life events. It's a novella, 124 pages. All right, that is my Friday reads for this week, and I think I'm going to be at the farm next week, so I might even be making a video from the farm, but not outdoors. It's very cold and lots of snow, but I'll maybe have some vlog footage to show you how wintry it is here. Thanks for watching.